Mr. Prohashka, you mentioned that the creature did not move, as if it were a costume. Do you think it would be possible to create such a costume?
That would be a difficult... I don't think so. Because that costume, if it would be a costume, that would have taken such a long time to put the hair. You should put the hair by glue them on. That would take about 10 hours, the whole makeup job. And it looked to me very, very real. I'm doing now this since 1939, and if that was a costume, that was the best I have ever seen.
Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree, and I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Just before dusk, we heard this screaming cry. Now, I've heard every animal that lives in the locality, and it wasn't any of those.
Everything was just dead quiet afterwards. Just made the hair crawl on the back of your neck.
The odor of this animal, after I rolled the window down, was so offensive that I couldn't remain there any longer. And this thing truly scared me.
This is the sign that the creature struck, leaving these indentations or scratch marks.
Many sightings have revealed this creature to be between 7 to 9 feet tall and 600 to 900 pounds.
He had the most knowing look on his face. His eyes. I remember the eyes, I think, more than anything else.
The way it went up the mountain, the way everybody describes Bigfoot, that's the only thing I could think it was, because bear just don't do things like that. I'd look at that mountain and I knew I didn't want to be around it. I knew something was there, or something was watching me all the time.
The subject had to be in excess of 9 feet tall.
What is the name of the famous videotape that our viewers are about to see?
Okay, that's sometimes referred to as the Patterson-Gimlin film.
The Patterson film. And I would ask staff there to please roll this, and if you would narrate for our viewers and tell us, what are we about to see? What is this videotape?
There's an animal walking through the forest. This is slightly advanced speed. It was
what forest? Where?
In northwestern California, Bluff Creek.
The weirdest movie ever made. The costume that cannot be replicated. The opus magnum of the greatest, yet anonymous costume artist to have ever lived. There are only few true mysteries remaining in the so-called rational modern world. But literally on the fringes of society, a paradigm shift could be waiting to be discovered by the wider public. Something that alters our perception of the world and our place within it. The Patterson-Gimlin film stands as one of these last remaining true mysteries, having thus far resisted the demystification that the modern world has brought. Similar to a monster from mythology, the attacks and attempts to debunk it only seem to have made it stronger, more mysterious, and more likely to be authentic. And as video technology advances, the Patterson-Gimlin film becomes increasingly problematic with each new generation of video enhancement programs. After nearly 60 years, the film has never been debunked. It has withstood scrutiny from scientists, forensic analysts, Hollywood special effects experts, and costume designers. No one can quite explain it, except those who believe in folklore. Roger Patterson was a Bigfoot enthusiast and researcher. Some describe him as a con man, a professional liar, and a dishonest person. He died in 1972, only a few years after that fateful day in October 1967. It is true, in 1966, Patterson had the idea of filming a docudrama on Bigfoot, and tried to borrow money from various persons for that movie. As far as it is known, nothing was ever recorded. Also, in the same year, he published a self-written book on Bigfoot that featured many of his Bigfoot drawings. One of these drawings was a sketch of a female Bigfoot with breasts. This picture, that is literally one among hundreds of Bigfoot sketches drawn by Patterson, and his vague idea to make a movie on Bigfoot, is all and everything that the critics and skeptics of the film have gathered as evidence against the authenticity of the film. After 57 years of research. Besides personal attacks on Roger Patterson, there is nothing to debunk or discredit the footage. Patterson's companion, Bob Gimlin, widely regarded as an honest and trustworthy person, maintains the authenticity of the film to this day. Nobody was ever able to explain how exactly the creature in the film, with all the detailed effects of its muscles and movements, could have been hoaxed, nor has a costume like that ever been replicated. All attempts to replicate the footage and prove it as a hoax, sometimes with big mainstream budget, have failed miserably. The creature in the Patterson-Gimlin film stands far above all Hollywood costumes of its time, and of the coming decades, certainly unmatched until the beginning of the digital age. From August 1967 on, a series of tracks at Bluff Creek, in the Six Rivers National Forest in Northern California, was investigated by John Green, Rene DeHinden, and others. These pictures were recorded by Rene DeHinden near the film site, around 2 months prior to the shooting of the famous footage. The film site is roughly 38 miles south of the Oregon border and 18 miles east of the Pacific Ocean. In fall of 1967, the track findings were reported to Roger Patterson by Al Hodgson, the owner of the Willow Creek Variety Store. In October, Patterson and his friend Bob Gimlin, both residents of Yakima in Washington State, set out for Northern California. They drove in Gimlin's truck, carrying supplies and 3 horses. In the first days of October 1967, they arrived in the Six Rivers National Forest. Let's listen to Bigfoot researcher Bill Miller on the prelude of the film for a short moment.
You're talking about the Roger Patterson film of 1967. Documentaries talk about that film all the time, but they terribly misstate the evidence as it happened. They were down there for nearly 3 weeks, as it's been told, and they hadn't found any prints, and one morning, Bob and Roger went up into Bluff Creek where they'd been before. They've been all over the place. They had to say, where are we going to go today? They decided to go up into Bluff Creek, and that's when they rounded that bend up in Bluff Creek on the sandbar. There was a downfall tree. The tree had a root system that was standing there, probably 8, 9 feet high, as Bob describes it. Roger was just ahead of him on his horse. Bob's pulling a pack horse, and he's on his horse, but he's got a much bigger horse. Roger rode a little horse I always tease and say is the size of a Great Dane. Roger was a little guy. So anyway, Roger rounds the bend, and when he does, his horse goes crazy. And Roger notices off by the creek, there's a creature squatted there, covered with hair. He pulls his horse down, tries to control it. He gets off of it, gets his foot hung up in the stirrup, frees himself, and he had his camera in the saddlebag in case they saw tracks. He grabs the camera out, it's one of those old hand-wound cameras, and he takes off running for it and tells Bob to cover him. The creature by then, when Bob come around and had seen it, when all this is going on with Roger's horse, it was standing what had happened, Roger Patterson had an interest in the Sasquatch for about 7 years or so or more. He'd been out looking for evidence, looking for tracks, gathering reports. And then in the summer of 1967, on Onion Mountain, there were some tracks that had been found. They were building roads at that time up through, making a highway north, up through Bluff Creek and on in up the west coast. So John Green went down to see these tracks. John Green's a local man, lived here. And when he got there, the tracks had pretty much been backbladed, and there was only a few left. Well, by the next morning, when John got up very early in the morning, the phone rang, and John says, obviously on a radio phone, the guy called and says, what you're looking for is here. That's all he said. John got a hold of the Sun newspaper in Vancouver. They put up $500 to get pay for a plane and a pilot to fly him down. John got a hold of Dale Moffat, and he brought a tracking dog named White Lady. They all loaded on this small Cessna, and a guy by the name of Keith Shazari was the pilot. Keith, I spoke to about a year ago, and after all these years, you should have heard him. He says that it was amazing the way the dog, they put him on the scent of the track where you'll see him just before dark. He said, Bill, he says the hair literally stood up on its back. That dog went into high alert. There was something about those tracks it did not like. There was over 1,000 tracks had been reported there. They counted, I think, 560, 70 tracks that were still left. Other people had been there to see them. Some had run over them, had stepped on them. But these tracks went on for over a mile or so. It went off the road into the bush, up and down a few inclines, through bushwhacking, back out onto the road again. And there were actually 2 sets of tracks that I've seen in the pictures, 15 and 13 inch. They didn't know if they were together, but they did cross paths a few times going back and forth. And then at some point, John Green, who knew Roger Patterson, a lot of the guys knew each other in this little circle. He called Roger Patterson's house when he was in town, and he told him, he left a message with Mrs. Patterson, Patricia, that when you let Roger know there are tracks down here, because at that time Roger's away over at Mount St. Helens with Bob Gimlin on an expedition. There's tracks down here. We know he's wanting to shoot a little amateur documentary of him with a Sasquatch hunter. He was hoping to see some tracks to film. Tell him good tracks, pristine, nice looking tracks. Come on down. It took about 2 or 3 weeks before Gimlin got around to actually being able to leave. Him and Roger took off for Bluff Creek. By the time they got down there, Bob's told me that when we got down there, you could see where the tracks had been, a lot of them, but he says because of the rains and they were in dust and dirt, loose dirt, had kind of washed them out and took a lot of the definition out. You could tell they were footprints, but they weren't really the nice, pristine tracks like John Green had described.
For decades, the exact location of the site, in Del Norte County in the Six Rivers National Forest, was lost, primarily because of regrowth of foliage in the streambed after the flood of 1964. It was rediscovered in 2011. It is just south of a north-running segment of the creek, informally known as the Bowling Alley. Bill Munns, one of the leading researchers of the footage, investigated for years what happened to the original film reel. But the whereabouts of the original is still unknown. It was last seen by Rene DeHinden in 1980, as DeHinden convinced the Film Vault in Southern California to show it to him. He then made Cibrachrome images from the original film reel. Somewhere between then and the early 90s, the film disappeared from its numbered location in the vault. The details that can be seen in the Cibrachrome photos and in the copies made from the second generation of the original film reel remain baffling and remarkable, even 60 years after the footage was shot. No skeptic has been able to explain how the footage was produced, nor to create a costume that could stand with the creature that is seen in the Patterson-Gimlin film. Let us take a look at these photos and video clips. And let's listen to various researchers like M.K. Davis, Jeff Meldrum, Grover Krantz, and others, who have analyzed the footage for decades. In our analysis, we will focus on the aspects of the alleged gorilla suit that should be most challenging to fake, which are the size and the mass of the creature, its body morphology like the length of its arms, and the movements of the muscles, fingers, and toes. Let's start with an analysis of the size and mass of the creature seen in the footage, a topic that has been debated for many decades. However, there is a way to estimate the creature's size and get an idea of its body mass. In 1968, John Green revisited the film site to recreate the scene, accompanied by a team of fellow researchers, including a man named Jim McLaren. A film and a series of photos showing McLaren while recreating the creature's movements were captured. Jim McLaren stood at 6.5 feet while wearing shoes. M.K. Davis, one of the leading experts on the Patterson-Gimlin film, used the McLaren footage to create an extraordinary version of the film. So, when we examine these pictures, it appears evident that the creature is at least 6.5 feet tall. Perhaps 6.6 or 6.7 feet would be a more realistic estimate. But what appears even more impressive is the enormous bulk of the creature. The creature in the Patterson-Gimlin film appears to be nearly double as wide as the human in the recreated scene. If this was a man in a costume, the costume would have been remarkably heavy, making the fluid walk shown by the creature much more challenging. Therefore, we can conclude that the creature is at least 6.5 feet tall and of immense proportions. This also eliminates any alleged hoaxers shorter than 6.5 feet from being the man in the gorilla suit. Let us now take a look at the length of the arms of the creature. Observation alone clearly shows that the creature's arms are too long in proportion to its body size to be within the human body ratio. While this detail is already obvious in the video footage, we should take a closer look at some of the cibachrome photos made by René de Hinden. In this version of the photos that were enhanced by M.K. Davis, it becomes even more evident that various details of the creature are not within the human body ratio. Its arms are literally hanging down to its knees during its abnormal and inhuman walk. Other interesting details that can be seen in these photos are the non-existent neck of the creature, as well as its cone-shaped head. Such details, like the length of its arms or its conical head shape, are features that would be extremely hard to fake. When we look again at the video footage, we see that the creature clearly bends its arms at the elbows, a fact that makes the idea of a costume with an arm prosthesis even more problematic. Let us listen again to Bigfoot researcher Bill Miller and to Professor Grover Krantz on the length of the arms of the Patterson-Gimlin creature.
In the film, if you do stabilization of the creature, you can see it had finger movement, it had wrist movement. It bent at the elbows. You put a man in a suit, because the arms are so long, people say, well, maybe he was using sticks to, I think Hieronymus, as somebody suggested this, Bob Hieronymus, was the last guy to claim to be in a suit. Possibly he used some sort of sticks or apparatus, even though Hieronymus, in his story, which I don't believe a word of, he said he slipped his hands in the gloves. But the problem is he's 5'10" or so. He's under 6 feet. And when we bend, then our arms have to bend at their elbow. Our wrists have to bend here. In order to get as wide as the back was, you, like Grover Krantz said, once you'd have to hold your arms up to the side of the elbows to get the shoulder width. Then you got this, so then you got to use some apparatus to swing the arms. But these bend, because you can see in the film, in the original film, people.
Second only to the footprints, I would class the Patterson film as the most powerful evidence.
The two men were on horseback in Northern California when they discovered this creature crouching beside a creek. Their presence alarmed the creature, which allegedly stood up and walked away. The sighting spooked Patterson's horse, which reared and fell over backward on top of him. About 20 seconds lapsed before Patterson grabbed his 16mm camera and started filming. Patterson kept rolling until he ran out of film. According to Krantz, the encounter was over in less than 2 minutes, and Patterson shot 952 color frames of what many say is a real Sasquatch. Krantz analyzed the film frame by frame. He reports no evidence of fakery, though he says he believes Patterson may have faked the film if he had the opportunity to do so. Krantz says no one has ever bothered to disprove the film.
Analyzing the creature in the film as to the idea that, well, it's just a big man in a fur suit. There is no man that can be fitted into a suit that gives those body proportions. The only way you could put a man in a suit is get a man 6.5 feet tall, walk in a slouch, but break his arm right about in the middle of the upper arm so that you give him a fake shoulder there. And I don't think anyone would have done that.
The next aspect of the creature we are going to focus on is the movement and the flexibility shown by various body parts of the creature, especially its toes, fingers, and muscles. The toes of the creature are clearly visible in many of the photos made by René de Hinden, but in motion, they are only visible for a short moment in the video footage. Bill Munns, who, before becoming a Bigfoot researcher, was responsible for special effects and makeup in Hollywood movies like The Return of the Living Dead, was able to create astonishing footage of the toes of the creature. Munns provided a detailed examination of the flexibility and of the movements of the creature's toes. These effects should be nearly impossible to fake if the person in the alleged suit does not have an extremely large and flexible foot. So, let's look at the next detail of the alleged gorilla suit. The hands of the creature seem to be enormous, much larger than ordinary hands. The flexibility and finger movements in the footage, again analyzed by M.K. Davis, appear extremely fluid. The creature moves hands and fingers naturally while walking. Again, when we look at all the details in the footage, we have to ask what type of costume could show these effects. So, let's look at one of the most astonishing aspects of the footage. The musculature of the creature, especially the muscle movements of the back and the right leg, seem to be clearly visible beneath the fur. Generations of researchers and special effects artists have tried to determine how such an effect could be achieved with a costume. When we look at this photo, the flexed muscles of the lower right leg are clearly visible. The musculature of the back can be seen in motion, working anatomically correct. The bulk of the creature appears to be massive. Also, the spine of the creature can clearly be seen. The movements of the muscles of the right thigh are also clearly visible. Even the buttock cheeks move separated from each other and anatomically correct. It appears that the only logical way to show these effects in a costume would be to glue hair on the moving and functioning body of a naked person. But when we are looking at these pictures, the body ratio of the creature alone eliminates the possibility that we are looking at a human. Let's listen again to Bill Miller on the musculature of the creature.
In the original film, people saw it, you could see the muscle movement. It's one thing to try to make a fake suit look like it's got muscles, or even make a muscle look like it moves. But these muscles in the film work off of each other. They fire in a certain sequence when we all walk, or we bend our elbows. When we move, everything works in a certain sequence off the other. To make something mechanical that could do all that and mimic perfectly nature, it's ridiculous. It wasn't really available at the time.
One detail that led some skeptics to believe the creature in the Patterson-Gimlin film is merely a man in a gorilla suit is an alleged line on the right thigh of the creature. However, upon examining a zoomed-in version of the cyberchrome photos, we can see that this alleged line is actually a patch of worn-down fur, likely caused by the creature's hands during walking. Again, this detail, barely visible and unknown to most observers of the film, should be extremely difficult to fake, and there is no logical reason to include such details in a costume. Through the decades, many people have claimed to have been the man in the gorilla costume. The most famous claim comes from a man named Bob Hieronymus, who alleges that Patterson paid him $1,000 to wear the suit in the footage. Hieronymus appeared as a guest in various TV documentaries and shows. Allegedly, he passed a polygraph test on this topic during one of these afternoon TV shows. Hieronymus teamed up with Philip Morris, a Hollywood costume designer who claimed that a modified version of one of his gorilla costumes was used in the footage. In the late 90s, the BBC filmed a documentary featuring Hieronymus and Morris, aiming to debunk the Patterson-Gimlin film. The result of the documentary is ridiculous and a miserable failure. It is evident that Hieronymus, who stands 5 feet 10 inches in shoes, could not have been the man in the alleged costume. The quality of the Philip Morris costume shown in the BBC documentary is a joke, just like the afternoon TV show in which Hieronymus passed his polygraph test. But Bob Hieronymus and Philip Morris were not the only people who failed miserably when it comes to creating a costume that can stand with the Patterson-Gimlin film. Let's take a look at various Hollywood costumes from blockbuster productions, just to remember how costumes actually really look. Planet of the Apes, 1968. A budget of $5.8 million. Oscar for Best Makeup. King Kong, 1976. A budget of $24 million. Oscar for Best Visual Effects. Star Wars, 1977. A budget of $11 million. Oscars for Best Visual Effects, Best Set Decoration, and Best Costume Design. Ridiculous compared to the Patterson-Gimlin footage. John Chambers, the creator of the costumes in Planet of the Apes and many other Hollywood movies, was linked to the Patterson-Gimlin footage by rumors for many years. In a 1997 interview, he made some remarkable statements, denying any involvement in the making of the film. He also stated that, in his opinion, neither he nor anyone else could have fabricated the creature seen in the film. I always was aware of the rumors concerning my involvement in the film, but I never took any steps to set the record straight because it helped with business. I was good, but not that good, he stated. Let's listen to Professor Jeffrey Meldrum on the claims of Hieronymus over his involvement in the film.
Claimant who seems to get the most attention on this point is Bob Hieronymus, who claimed to be the man in the fur suit. The problem with this, the most glaring problem is, as he joined forces with Philip Morris, a famous costume designer, the two apparently didn't confer sufficiently before sharing their stories because they didn't get them straight. They contradict. Bob Hieronymus gave a description of the costume that was diametrically opposed to the description of the costume provided by Philip Morris. Hieronymus describes a costume that was made out of a green horsehide and talked about it being in two principal pieces, one that came over the top, like pajama tops, but without any buttons or enclosures, just a piece that was probably stitched up the back, and a pair of stiff trousers that he wore, of course, and he had football pads, he claimed, and other padding to bulk him out a bit. And then a football helmet that had a fake face built out around it with a single eye opening, because Bob has one glass eye, and they used his spare glass eye in the face of the costume in order to catch the glint of the sun, he claimed. Now imagine walking in this unwieldy costume with a single port of vision, which he claims was a good 2 inches away from his eye. So put a little toilet paper roll up against your eye and then go out there, close the other, and try to walk on an uneven, irregular surface. But if that wasn't enough, then Philip Morris claimed that Roger had simply purchased and then modified one of his off-the-shelf costumes.
Something also worth considering is that, given the fact that the footage was recorded in 1967, and the original recording is indeed shaky and not in high resolution, hardly anyone was able to see the remarkable details in the footage for around 30 years, until the advent of digital film research. Faking all these details, which aren't even visible in Hollywood movies, without the proper equipment for recording, seems illogical. The other, debunked Bigfoot videos from the 1970s, released in various pseudo-documentaries which followed the Patterson-Gimlin film, all shared a common trait. The encounters lasted for several minutes, and the camera footage was stable. It is also noteworthy that none of these pseudo-documentaries that featured faked Bigfoot videos was recorded prior to the Patterson-Gimlin film. All of them were published after 1967. There is no encounter video known prior to the Patterson-Gimlin footage. The only movie that predates the footage and features a comparable creature is The Abominable Snowman of 1957, produced by the legendary Hammer Studios, featuring Peter Cushing. The remarkable good movie is widely based on the American millionaire Tom Slick and his search for the Yeti in the Himalayas. You can find a recolorized version of the movie at the Sasquatch Mafia Patreon channel. However, the Yeti is only shown for a few seconds, motionless and without details.
Perhaps the most startling and far-reaching event in the recent history of Bigfoot hunting happened to a long-time investigator by the name of Roger Patterson. In October of 1967, he and a friend were in the Bluff Creek area of Northern California to investigate a reported sighting of two creatures. Suddenly his horse shied as a large creature stood erect from behind a log where it had been drinking from the creek. Patterson grabbed a 16mm camera from the saddlebag and jumped from the back of the rearing horse to take the following pictures. Let's hear in Patterson's words exactly what happened that day.
As I walked across the sandbar, I was able to get some fairly good footage of it. It turned a couple of times and looked at us, and as it turned, it seemed to give me the impression that it didn't want anything to do with us. It didn't run, it didn't act scared, but yet it acted leery of us.
Another question we have to ask is, how realistic is the idea that Patterson would have been able of producing a fake like this? Patterson was a Bigfoot researcher. Also, him and Gimlin were both experienced outdoorsmen. But they were not special effects artists or costume experts. Nor can we assume that they had detailed knowledge of anatomy or body morphology. Let's listen to Professor Grover Krantz and his opinion on Roger Patterson and the famous footage.
The most convincing visual evidence of Bigfoot is a film taken by Roger Patterson in Northern California. Dr. Krantz believes it to be authentic.
I've examined the film many times, watching it forward, backwards, stop framed, measured, and everything. And all of the anatomy of the creature is perfectly consistent. It just simply does not fit with a man wearing a suit. In fact, a suit of that size, we can establish exactly how big it is. There's no way a man could fit into it. The shoulders and chest are simply too wide. The feet are properly designed for carrying that kind of body weight, and that doesn't make any sense unless you've got a body of that size. And Patterson could not have faked any of this stuff. I talked to him about some of the things I saw, and he didn't even understand what I was talking about.
Another important point is that nobody involved in the alleged hoax, including Patterson or anyone else, ever profited from the film or attempted to monetize it. In fact, both Patterson and Gimlin spent money in the aftermath of the film, showing it to various experts in an attempt to prove its authenticity. If the film was faked by Patterson, he didn't try to profit from it, which also makes a hoax implausible. This analysis of the Patterson-Gimlin footage is by far not complete. Multiple books have been written dealing with aspects of the footage we have not even touched in this analysis, like the tracks found at the film site and the estimated weight of the creature, its facial movements, the gait of the creature, or its infamous breasts. But we will finish our first analysis of the Patterson-Gimlin film here. More on the footage is coming soon at the Sasquatch Mafia YouTube channel. What is your opinion on Patty and the most famous Bigfoot video of all times? Let me know in the comments. Hit the like button if you have enjoyed this episode of Bigfoot Territory. Subscribe to the Sasquatch Mafia channel at YouTube for more videos on Bigfoot and Sasquatch. Check out Sasquatch Mafia at Patreon and TikTok for extra content. Thank you for watching.